So it's good and bad to be the last, because clearly we're all tired. I'm tired, you're tired, but it's also good because I managed to talk with a lot of you, so I could figure out, a lot of your background, and also learn a lot from all the other speakers, which is great, right? So last talk is about React Native Web, and the question here is probably right now a little bit spoiled with all the other talks. Clearly enough, today is possible to put React Native on the web. But a tiny little word there, your React Native app can run on the web, yes or no? That is a completely different question, right? Because your React Native app, which is in production, which has spent, has its own legacy, as that sort of, has been there for a while, all the tiny little libraries in there that are not exactly on the very latest version. Would they run on the web or not? Actually, by the way, does any of you have any React Native app on the... Okay, good, that does make sense. So yeah, look, the last talk is going to be a journey, I hope it's going to be fun, where, I started this journey a couple of years ago, but before diving straight into it, let's try to introduce myself. So my name is Nicola Zaghini. I'm a principal engineer at Phorest. Phorest is a software company that provides solutions for the air and beauty and aesthetic industries. So it's based in Ireland. I'm actually Italian, as you can probably tell. So actually, thank you very much for the conference here, for having me here. It's beautiful to be able to speak on an Italian conference here. And yeah, so the guys which are probably, and I hope they're watching this live from Dublin, if you ask them, what is my role in Phorest, they would say it's principal engineer. But in reality, many of them would probably tell you that I'm a mobile principal engineer, right? Because my background, and it's probably important to give you a little bit of a context who's talking to you, who's trying to tell you, some stuff. My background is in mobile. I start developing native apps very early, as soon as the first iOS SDK is released, but actually probably even earlier with the Nokia, so kind of that old. And yeah, I fell in love with the native. And actually, is there any native developer in you? Oh, amazing. iOS or Android? iOS, Android. Okay, great. So fantastic. So basically, what happens that in my early days, I'm lucky enough to be able to work with a company that builds application for airlines. So if you ever happen to flown with the EasyJet company, for example, and you booked your flights through the first iOS app, that app was proudly mostly built and definitely architected in Sant'Arcangelo, which is a town near Rimini here in Italy. So this is just to give you the context of someone that is born on the native side of things, and then after a while decides to move on the React Native side of things. And this is important because when you hear talks about React Native, it's mostly from people that comes from the web, which is interesting. It's totally fair, absolutely. Actually, we're going to talk about that. But you're going to get a slightly different point of view from me. So how do I cross path with the Phorest guys? Basically, I'm pushed to basically try to find cross-platform solution. I don't want to do cross-platform solution because only Objective-C is the real thing, right? Native apps can be only built with native technology, but it gets to be too expensive. Therefore, I find React. I fell in love with React, honestly, like the first talk we got this morning, just completely a game changer to build application. Then I want to use React Native for sure. And Phorest is a company that in 2018 has a lot of apps in their stores, because we do manage a lot of salons, and each and every salon has its own native app. And when the number starts to be important, like 200, 300 apps, or 200, 300 customers, it's difficult to manage all of them in production. Therefore, React Native is not just only a fantastic technology, but as a super, kind of killer feature, which is over-the-air update that lets me manage a lot of apps. So it's a bet between myself and Phorest to try to rewrite all those applications in React Native. This is how I learned React Native, from being a very, Objective-C guy for over 10 years. And this is actually, turns out to be an extremely good project. This is how we cross path. One of the most impressive things ever done, and today we have over 4,000 application. I call them native because React Native just builds native application in the store, 4,000 iOS, 4,000 Android, which is quite a lot. And yeah, this is another talk which I sold many, many times in the past, but I had to figure out something new. So let's move a little bit more to the present, and it's 2002. This is clearly me and my CTO talking on a one-to-one, looking at our beautiful apps. They're colorful, they just work very well. We look at our statistics, 64% conversion rate on those apps, which is massive as a number. But it's like that because clearly it's a very loyal thing. If you have an app of your salon where you go do your cuts or your nails, you're very loyal. So you open the app to book, rebook, and all this kind of stuff. So therefore, obviously, the app is very used. After that, clearly, we also always ask to our customers, how much do you love the application? And over the years, we have built over a million of reviews, and we also know that this app is very much loved. Therefore, myself and my CTO are extremely happy about this, right? But we are left with a problem. The apps is a bit of a niche. Only the very loyal clients are on the apps. This beautiful experience, right? The bulk of the customers book through the web, and the web, you don't have infinite resources. The web have been a little bit neglected over the time, yeah. So it's not as good, as beautiful as those new shiny apps. And furthermore, we also know that pretty much everybody is accessing the web through their phones, all right? So we're left with this beautiful Porsche parked there, but actually, sorry, we're in Italy. This beautiful Ferrari parked there, and every day, 90% of the time, we use our Fiat Panda. Who owns a Fiat Panda? Oh, it's a beautiful car. It's a beautiful car. It's super reliable and everything, but you've just bought a Ferrari and you always drive the Panda. So clearly there is something going on. If we could only leverage apps on the web, my CTO tells me, and I'm like, oh, why in the world I didn't think about that, right? Why? Because again, still the same thing as before. Only Objective-C exists, then React Native is a thing, is definitely a thing. But I don't care about web because I only care about mobile. So let's open up a little bit and try to, because I've heard at that stage, it was 2012, I've heard of something called React Native Web. It's not like every other company is doing it, but I've heard about it. So just let me try to explain to you what React Native Web is. And the easiest way to understand this is just to play the video from Nicola Zaghini, which is the father of React Native Web. It's 2017, but I just can't. This is outside of the policy of the conference. So I'm really trying to explain to you what it is, which is easy enough. So basically, just tiny little bit of history. We got this morning, but this is faster, okay? Don't worry. 2013, reactjs gets out. Facebook released it. You can build websites. Great, amazing, fantastic. So it's 2015 when React Native comes. And I don't know about you guys because I lived in that stage on the native side of things. React Native is just the answer for web people to be able to go on the native side of things. So we, as native developers, don't care at all because it's not as the real thing. And this is how we feel or how we believe React Native is. So we go on. And that feeling, many people still believe is the same. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I make it up, believe me. 2016, React Native Web comes out, which once again target the web. Therefore, you know this gesture. If you don't know the gesture, you know this explosion, right? And I got this question, it's a fair question, and I got this question from a friend of mine, a colleague that was like, guys, what's the problem with you? It's on the web, but it's not on React. They say, you have React.js, then you build React Native, then you build React Native Web to target the web again. What's your problem? And in reality, the question is fair from you. It's less fair from me not to have a straight answer since I've built that beautiful app, 4,000 apps here. I know React Native, but it turns out that I need to go back and study and understand what is React Native. React Native Web, I can understand only if I know what is React Native. And in fact, we learn that React Native is not a tool for web developers to be on the web, on the native side of things because they can't learn Objective-C or Swift or Kotlin or whatever you want. It's actually a completely different story. And by the creators or the first developers over there, is basically an experiment to figure out web the good parts, and even more, a browser that implements a subset of what the web supports. And for native people, whenever you put the word browser in there, they're like, oh, no, this is not going to be. But it's not browser in the terms of the browser, web browser that we know, right? In fact, I really like this. Not a browser, but not unlike a browser. So to me, the definition, which I wanted just to give mine, so it stays in the slides, okay, it's not worth much, but it's just like each platform dedicated browser. The experience must feel native, smooth, and perfectly at home. All right, so we changed completely the idea behind React Native, okay? So if we look at this picture, this is the basic picture of React Native, right? But it's there. It's just that it's difficult to see if you don't know how to read it. So what we see is that each and every little box represents a little browser, a browser, but not in the terms of the web browser, to basically drive to the best way of the native platform what the React Native code at the very top is telling to do, right? So once you understand this, you understand that React Native Web does make sense because the promise of React Native, it's there, right? This sort of an abstract language to drive multiple platforms to their best extent. So I can go back to my CTO and say we can have a great and unified experience across platform in a single code base. And clearly, here is where the challenge starts, because you need to know that you're going to play with a technology that is solid before embarking on something like that, because it's easy enough to say, let's build a reactjs thing. Our company is actually very much on Ember. Let's build that thing in Ember. Why would you want to embark on something like that if it doesn't make any sense? And yeah, we go and do a proof of concept. So here we're going to see all the steps that we did to figure out if our application that have been in production for years could have been migrated to the web, and what would have been the cost. Because this is an important answer the question as well, right? Because definitely, in a way or another, we always make things work. Because developers, we make things work. But what is the cost? What is maintainability? How good is this idea, right? Let's start from the first thing, code organization. Well, this picture tells us how we should organize the code, because otherwise, you may think about, okay, I know React Native, I start from there, I'm not starting from the web again, I start from React Native, I know how to lay out my project, but if I have to, do I have to add some web code? What is this thing? I have no idea. But if we look at this picture, it's easy enough, because we can think about, we will have to have a folder which contains this web sort of browser, the iOS Android folder, which we contain this sort of a browser as well, and on the React Native, and a place where we just put our source code, our code base. So easily enough, hopefully is readable, because it's super small here, so I need to turn and look at that. So we have 3 folders, basically, more or less. Libs apps is a React Native code. Apps mobile contains the basic React Native application, and apps website contains the website. So you basically are co-locating stuff, okay? Let's focus a little bit on the place where you put all your source code. It's actually pretty simple. It's a standard, it's a standard React Native application source code, basically. It just has the basic entry point, all of them, your component, your navigation, as you like to organize the thing. Clearly, I should have probably mentioned this before, but you now have noticed, if you are in this domain, we are not using Expo. And if you don't know what Expo is basically Next.js for React Native, okay? This is what Expo is. It's battery included, React Native. We don't use that for multiple reasons. It's a beautiful platform, and actually these days, if you start fresh, Expo gives you a lot of tooling to go to target iOS, Android, and web all together. But many of us have, React Native applications which are, bare bones applications, right? Because we want our own dependencies and so on. Apps mobile, this is probably the most straightforward, and it's probably understandable because, it starts with React Native, the app that already exists. You may notice probably on the top left is very light, but this file was changed 23 months ago. So once we scaffolded the project, okay, during our proof of concept, we basically I had to create this file, a single main file. Everything else is default, Android, iOS folder, you have your pods in there and everything. We didn't have to touch it anymore. So this is kind of a good thing, right? Because it means is not too much involved. You don't have to go there too much. And something you may notice, but again, it's very light, so you probably don't. We do have also a node module folders inside, and this node module folders is actually a symlink. Why it is a symlink? Because in reality, code co-location is the good idea, but not by itself. Probably it's much better to use a tool like a monorepo manager, like NX, and we do use that. We do have, it gives you shared tooling to build and compile, shared configuration, but most importantly, I would say the shared dependencies, because with shared dependencies, you have, your package.json defined at the root level, which makes sure it's all coherent, and what is needed for the React Native app and what is needed for the web is going to be reconciled at that level. All right? So now let's jump on the website, where obviously I and my team, we're weaker because we're more on the native side of things. So in here, I can't help but mention another important person on this sort of a space, which is Fernando Rojo. In 2022, I find his talk. As you can see, he's talking at Next.js Conf. Therefore, the stack that he's proposing, and we believe is probably going to be okay. We just have hired a person at that stage called George, which knows Next. So we say it's a nice stack. And, we're not so confident in there. So let's take a battery included thing, like Next, And this is basically the setup. It's a bit more involved in here when we do our proof of concept. It's a bit more involved because we realize right away that using page router, we were on version 13. We really need to create a file for each and every page in our website, to be able to let Next route, which is totally fine. But the files are all empty, basically linking to the actual source code, which is common, right? A couple of nuances, probably is even difficult to read, but there are a couple of configurations to basically tell, Webpack, when you read React Native, ask React Native Web to tell you what the story is. And for native libraries that basically have to hook into the native, you need to transpile them. Therefore, either they support React Native Web, and believe me, there are plenty of them that today support right away React Native Web, or otherwise it will basically impede the app to crash because they're trying to get into the native, but the native is not there because you are on the browser when you're running on the web. Those are honestly the two major configurations we had to do. It took a little bit, to be fair. It was the very beginning, it took probably 2-3 weeks. But a good bit is that once they were there, we didn't have to touch them much anymore. So our first step on the proof of concept, basically, code organization was kind of a hit because we could boot both the app and the web pretty fast. No content in there, but still they were running. So now screen navigation. Screen navigation is pretty interesting because clearly it's very different between the web and the native. I don't have to explain to you. There is links and history versus in-app navigation, all the gesture-driven, the models. It's just very different, the navigation. And that was probably the thing that worried me the most. What do you have to do, though? You have to abstract a little bit more, go a little bit more high up, and try to find a way to reconcile the two worlds. We were using React Native Navigation v6, which is probably the most standard on React Native, and Next.js routing. So what did we do in this case? Did we come up with our own library? No, because our friend Fernando Rojo had his own library built. And I tell you, sometimes you go to the community, and the community is amazing. It's called Solito. It works with React Native and Next.js exactly as promised, and it works extremely well. So we could get it. So as you can see here is actually some React Native code base, and on a pressable, which is like a button, on a pressable we can just say push, and when you push it, we have our own sort of a syntactic sugar there with get route URL, and then this is basic routing on Next.js, and this is the routing on the native app. So in this case, I have to declare, when the enum rewards list, for example, is kind of, it's what I have to render. On Next.js, you have to do this. on native you have to do this. So this is something that you need to know that exists. You know, it's kind of duplicated. You can make a lot of syntactic sugar around that, but at the end of the day, it's like that. I'm gonna mention, you know, a few things after. Okay, this is actually pretty interesting. I hope you can actually read it. Clearly, when you navigate somewhere else, you push. So you're going to another page in the web, or you're pushing into a stack into the native. You can pass parameters. But one big lesson that we learned moving from native to web is that, you know, on native, it's kind of easier because it's all in memory. So if I want to pass to the next screen a big object, I don't care, I just pass it. You know, because it's not a problem. It's in memory. I don't even know it works internally, but I can pass the object without any sort of an overhead. Clearly, this is not possible on web because it has to be appended to the URL, right? Unless you want to do some tricks and save it underneath and all this kind of stuff. So therefore, one of the biggest challenge was basically to reaccommodate all our navigation so that, you know, IDs and strings are passed from a screen to another. Okay, so you have the ID, and in the next page you figure out and pick up the object. So this probably, the navigation was probably the most intense one. Yeah, once again, I cannot avoid to mention Expo, which it's great. The Expo router is trying to be, you know, to build those universal React Native application. So it's once again a navigator which has battery included. So most likely you don't have to have this sort of a duality between the web and the native on the navigation. Not something that we use, but doesn't mean we will never use it in our life, right? Because the project is anyway starting to 2022. I don't think this was their production ready. So probably the most two difficult things are now over. So we have the project, it builds. We do have the navigation, so we can move and we can open modals and everything. Now let's look at styling and animation, you know. And this is where we were kind of finally something that it's really out of the box. This is what we use. We use style component, we use Lottie, and we use bare bones animations from, you know, the animated API, and they just work out of the box. So no real pain in there. We were super fast. Yeah, dancing people. We already had our own. We already had our own theme that was working. The only thing that I really wanted to add here and mention, for reasons, you have to import style components /native everywhere. I have my theory on why this is important. I'm not going to share it here because it may be totally wrong, and I'm recorded. But the thing is that, yeah, you just remember to import always /native. Otherwise, it won't work. It took a while just to realize that thing, and then it was perfect. This is how it looks like. I don't know if you ever seen a style component. I bet you did. So looks like that. We can have our own variables and so on. So it all works perfectly cross-platform. So the platform-specific features, you know, how do you distinguish if you really wanted to go, okay, this should happen on iOS, this should happen on Android, or this should happen on the web? It's, oops, wrong key. If you ever use React Native, you know that Platform OS is actually out of React Native. You know, it tells you what OS you're running, and then you have your new OS, which is called Web. So you can do a conditional on that. Clearly, you know, the creating files with the .platform is probably another way to do thing. In this case, you know, I have an example there. It's loyalty screen and loyalty screen web. Why do I have two different files for the loyalty screen? In this case, it's just a product decision. You know, apps are more richer than the web. And it's pretty cool that I can use this tool, because then I can just create two different files that don't touch each other and they don't overlap either as well. In general, you know, and I have a slide afterwards on you know, kind of the end of it, what happened. Most on we use those conditional mostly on modals, share panels, and styling, which ideally we could even leverage up into our own library. Now, platform specific, yeah, sorry, this is a little bit of a wrapper that we created ourselves, ran on platform, ran on web only, ran on native only, just to avoid ifs everywhere, because they were just simply very, very ugly in a way. State management, this is quite interesting. I didn't realize it would have been a problem. We used to use Redux toolkit because it's pretty powerful and pretty pretty okay. And we realized pretty soon that while it works perfectly, you know, being a little bit naive on the web, we came there and said, okay, we get Next.js and we're gonna get server-side rendering out of the box. You know, we're gonna do cool stuff over there. In reality, as of today, we can only do client-side rendering. You know, if you think about that, React Native, it's a bit of a single-page application. You have your own bundle, it's in there. You know, you have the native around it, and sadly enough, it's what happens on the web as well. Why you can't do server-side rendering, especially if you are on the Redux toolkit side of things, because it becomes extreme. We definitely tried to make sure that we could rehydrate and reconciliate server status and client-side status, but that was probably the moment that we said, okay, up until now, it wasn't super easy, but it wasn't even difficult, or whatever we have, it does make sense, it's maintainable, we can live with that. As soon as we tried to do that, it became very clear that the solution that we could come up with were definitely too tricky to maintain over time. Therefore, we gave up on that idea. One thing that we didn't use in the native apps, in the React Native apps, was the React query, now renamed 10-stack query, sorry. But this is really actually very useful and powerful, especially for the things that I mentioned before, the fact that you move from screen to screen and you can't pass the big objects to another screen on the web, while on native is pretty normal and pretty standard. And therefore, with this, we could reconciliate very well the server state with the client state. It was definitely useful. So, all right, fantastic. So, sorry, I think I just skipped a slide. So we are at the end of the proof of concept, and this we got. On the left, we got our web application, and on the right, our React Native application. You see in the simulator, it's a browser, but it's exactly the same thing. Everything that is slightly different, it's our decision. We want the header to be slightly different, and this is something that I think it's fine, and you can pick. The calendar is probably more powerful on native because of animations again. But all in all, this is how the application are there. So come back, game changer. This is one of our trademarks. How long for the migration, says the CTO? Don't worry, mate. We did the proof of concept. 6 months should be absolutely enough, clearly. Okay, never. Yeah, I'm an optimist. They should know at this stage that I'm an optimist. Don't ever. So it took a little bit more, 12 months later, and we are on the stage being able to present this to our customers. But at the end of the day, it's not because the technology was so difficult. It's all the fault of that Panda. The Panda was packed with accessories that we had no idea, that the Ferrari didn't have. So we had to build an extrapolate thing and put into the app, which we didn't know at the beginning. So it took time just to develop things. It was not just a migration. We have way less reviews now because it's a much newer product, but getting there to that 4.9 out of 5, very, very proud of. And last 5 minutes of the conference, probably 10 minutes of the conference, let's see a little bit of a retrospective, because that was interesting for me to put together because I didn't check that before. So how much do you have to be platform specific when you build on React Native Web? React Native that also runs the web. How much do I have to accommodate for the web, right? Well, we have 7,000 lines of code, more or less, and only 175 lines are very much platform specific. It's not much. And again, mostly comes down to styling and the handling of the models. So that's something we should definitely put a library on top. And in terms of files, we have 312 files, and 24 of them have the .web extension. So I was curious myself, what are those files? In reality, many of them are somehow related, for example, to internationalization, which is funny. Why? I'm going to show you after. Some are on Stripe, because clearly, we allow payments. Stripe has the JavaScript SDK and the React Native SDK, PSI compliance. Let's not mess with them. 2 different files, easy life, and so on. Not so many things, to be fair. Performance, here we go. Here we're talking about the internationalization. Why? Because naively, again, I told you, mobile person, naively, if you don't, it's a real monoblock. It's a real block. So we tried, little by little on the web only, where you can have a performance problem, because in the React Native we didn't have before, so we don't have now. We tried with the code. We tried to introduce code splitting and lazy loading. So clearly, Lottie, which is a very big library, I need to import it like that on the web, and I can't let React Native see this, the iOS or the Android stuff see this, because the dynamic won't work over there. So we move the files. Internationalization as well. We support many languages, so rather than loading all of them at the start, we just load them like that. There's probably maybe much better ways, but this has reduced quite a lot our initial payload downloads, as you can see. As this morning was pointed out, React Native Web is pretty big, in fairness. To be fair, its bulk is about 70 kilobytes over there. Has biggest Sentry, which is interesting. You want to know if it crashes the app, but you pay a lot. As you see, Lottie is chunked out because of that thing, and many other things are chunked out. Yeah, in fairness, there are not gazillion of talks about React Native Web performance, because it's difficult to push it very much. But yeah, there's no real opportunities to do it very differently. This morning was introduced the topic of the React strict DOM, but it changes quite a lot the view, because you don't write anymore in React Native. You write in a language which is again different, with 70,000 line of code. In here, more or less, we just brought the original app, introduced React Native Web, and adapted a little bit, which is very different, right? Than rewriting completely. And the old app kept working without any problem. Monorepo maintainability is something that scares me, because if you guys work in React Native, you know yourself, it's not easy. It's not super easy to upgrade React Native when it's time, even if the tools today is much, much better. I'm gonna tell you because this is the time of where is the problem with the monorepo? That clearly the monorepo, the React Native, and the Next.js, they all have to go up or down in harmony. You just can't upgrade one and not upgrade the other, because the React version is going to be diverging and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, we're starting this basically in a month's time, so I'm going to let you know how tricky it's going to be to maintain all of that. And last but not least, was it worth? Was it worth? Hell yeah, baby. Hell yeah. Oh yeah, I'm done, my friend, I'm done. Yeah, we believe it was definitely worth it. The app is working very well. After 12 months, we have brought our Ferrari to the web. It's performing, again, may not be super small, the payload you have to download at the beginning, but we haven't got any complaint in that sense. The app, once it's downloaded, is super fast and works very well. And the luxury, it's a real luxury of being able to deliver a feature on 3 platforms and basically solve bugs on 3 platforms is really great. So thank you very much for listening. Here are the questions if you want to.
Thank you, Nicola.
Welcome.
Can't wait to play with this tonight because it was amazing. So, any question? Here we go. Thank you, my friend.
Hello. You were talking about the project you started some time ago, right? And if you were starting a new project today, what would you choose? Rather a React Native for web or this new emerging technology, React strict DOM?
Okay, it's a very good question. It's difficult to answer because, yeah, you look at. I'll tell you the story. The day that I was pitching React Native to Phorest was the day, or more or less around the time that Airbnb ditched React Native. Do you remember when Airbnb said, "You know what? React Native is not a thing anymore for us. Finished." So, technology goes in this sort of a sense. The fact that today, Facebook tells you, hey, you know what? these React strict DOM is what we're going to maintain and so on, clearly puts a lot of weight over there. You know, if you read Nicholas Gallagher, you know, he says if you have to start today, you should definitely consider using React Native DOM. React strict DOM. I don't know. The real deal to me at the moment is that the syntax is completely the vision of React Native to be the syntax, to be the API, and all the other, you know, being able to deploy everywhere. That was the dream. This breaks a little bit because it's yet another syntax. It's not HTML. As far, you know, I haven't played much, so I may give you, you know, information like that. But yeah, I don't know. Today, for example, if you talk to anyone in the React Native community, they're gonna tell you today you have to start with Expo, because Expo is Butter included, React Web, and React Native. Okay. So yeah, it's a difficult choice, to be honest. It's a difficult choice, but yeah, if I have to start a project today from scratch, I would definitely just pick Expo. Probably because the other guy is very new, very promising as well, though. So hard. Don't start it today. Wait a year and see what the story is. Okay.
Other questions here? Okay, I have one here. What's the A11Y like? Is it possible to have an accessible app without complicating too much the React Native side of the code base?
Oh, the accessibility. We're talking about.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic. So it's something that we haven't, you know, delved into much, but you know, even listening to the talks before, React Native in itself, you know, is way more strict in terms of tag. You don't have something like div, okay? That you can do whatever you want. So you have your button, you have your pressable, you have things that are already coded. Therefore, you expect that accessibility comes out of it. And the React Native web, it says, is built around accessibility. So the expectation is that the HTML code that it puts down is very accessible. But honestly, after watching the talk before, I was very curious to point my website to those tools and see how it scores. So I'm fairly sure that, you know, it's not going to be as bad as someone may think, you know.
Okay, so bringing it up one last time for Nicola.
Thank you very much.